Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Katherine Kelly again. I am going to share a little bit about contracts. So, what are karmic contracts and what do they mean? What are they about? Who do we have them with? All those kinds of things. But, from a mental health perspective, I try to help people understand that a lot of the life lessons that they have, a lot of the challenges, the bumps on the road, the things that feel like they're falling apart or like are binding them, a lot of them have to do with contracts of one or another sort. So I wanted to give you some information about kind of how these form, what they're about, what you're supposed to learn, all that kind of stuff. And I've got notes here, so you're gonna see me looking back and forth with my notes here so that I can make sure that I give you the information that I really want to encapsulate for you today. The first thing to think about is that a contract is basically something that binds us for a responsibility of some sort. So think about a business contract. So both of you have contracted, the business and yourself, or two businesses have contracted to get something done. So in other words, a construction contractor, you tell them what you want done in your house. You have a contract, whether it's signed or verbal, and the responsibility is basically up to the person you've hired. You think about I'm trying to think of just a binding contract for, maybe you have trying to think here, a marketing company, and you have basically said you're going to do certain kinds of marketing for this particular person or company, and then you have to work together to get that figured out. You have a binding contract. But we also have lots of other kinds of contracts, and these are in the personal way. These are the kinds of things that get kind of sticky, but we know that there's a responsibility there. But if you can understand it from a bigger perspective, from what I call a soul perspective, you stand back and you look and you realize, wow, there is something going on. There's some sense of responsibility I have for this person or this situation or this career or this job or the world. It could be anything. So I'm going to walk through these. There are three basic kinds of contracts you can have. One is with yourself. So, in other words, you've contracted to do something in this lifetime that basically you may not know that at very early in your life, but your path is leading you in one way or another to be able to fulfill this contract. And I'm going to back up for just a second and say this, that these contracts are set before we come into this lifetime. Our souls have already decided and have already kind of decided what kind of lessons we're going to have, what kind of co-creation we're going to have, what kind of impact we're going to have on the world. And it's really up to us once we get to the lifetime to see it through. And so we're already set up for these kinds of contracts. And again, they may not be conscious situations. They may be situations where your life is leading you in one way or another. And then boom, you get locked into something that you feel like you're supposed to do in one way or another. That's where the contract comes in. That's where it starts to activate. That's where it starts to play out. It may not be active until you meet a particular person and you're supposed to marry them or partner with them or have children with them or whatever it might be. But everything leads to that situation where that contract can become activated. So again, and you're going to understand that a little bit more as I describe each of the different kinds of contracts. Now, there are many more that I'm not going to be able to describe today, but I want to kind of wet your whistle. I want to open this can for you so you can start thinking about your own life, or for if you were a practitioner or a coach, that you can start to open the door for yourself to look at the people that you work with a little bit differently as well. So, okay, I'm going to go back to the three kinds of contracts. So if you have a contract with yourself, there is something that compels you to do something in a certain way or get locked into something to be, again, activated into some part of your soul path because you are supposed to go down that road or that path to complete those contracts, whatever that might be. So for instance, for me, I was about 14 or 15 years old when I knew I was supposed to be a psychologist. It was it was sophomore year. I'm pretty sure it was sophomore year of my high school where I took an honor psychology class. And within about a week, I knew I was supposed to be a psychologist. I didn't know what kind of psychologist. I didn't know where that path was going to take me. But my contract got activated at that point so that I knew, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. Now, I know that is not typical for people to know what they're supposed to do at that young age, but for whatever reason, And I think there are many reasons why mine had to become activated that young in life. But it was one of those things where I think it activated because I had so much that I needed to get in place so that I could be doing what I'm doing for you right now. So I had to know at a young age. Had to know that this was a path so that I could keep bringing you what I call ancient wisdom to the modern soul. Because that realization, that contract with myself that it got activated, really was activated to the point where I wasn't letting anything get in the way of it. And that's how this goes. A contract is set within your soul structure, your energetic structure, that you can't not do whatever it is that you're contracted to do. You have to do it. It's like you don't even always know why you're so passionate about it or feeling responsible about it. You just get locked into it and you can't stop. So contracts are, again, once they get activated, there's no turning back. There's something that is happening existentially for you that you are having to complete in order to move on to the next level, whatever that is. Now, going back to this, you can have many, many different kinds of contracts with yourself. And so that was just one. I'm going to go through many, many different kinds of contracts, and you're going to see how they might fit into these three categories. So the second category is that you may have a contract with someone else, with another soul that is on this planet. And it's one of those things where, again, that's where love at first sight comes in. You see someone, wow, I'm supposed to be with this person. I'm supposed to marry this person. I'm supposed to have kids with this person. You can see a friend immediately and know, wow, I'm supposed to be with this person. I'm supposed to know this person. You can have a contract with very difficult souls as well. And so some of these soul to soul kinds of contracts have to do with what it is you're supposed to learn. Now, I would argue that most of these contracts are about learning something and what it is that you're supposed to learn as a soul yourself. But particularly when it comes to soul kinds of contracts, it is all about the lessons. It is all about what you're supposed to co-create or co-evolve into so that you both have the opportunity to glean something from that situation. So again, you can have contracts with yourself, you can have contracts with other souls, and then the third kind of contract is a contract with the universe or a contract with the higher beings that are out there. Now, what that means to me is that there is a bigger role you are supposed to play on the planet, whether others know about it or not, whether you know about it or not, but there's some sort of bigger role you're supposed to play on the planet that is going to have a global impact, that is going to have a widespread impact. Now, again, I'm going to walk through several of these different kinds of relationships and the lessons that they bring, and also how to know if these contracts are complete. Because I think it's going to help you really understand your own life. Because as you're listening, you're probably going to start scanning, going, wow, okay, this person that I knew at this age had such an impact on me. What was the lesson? What was the karmic contract that was there? So you're going to start to scan this as I talk through these. So I'm going to start with relationship contracts. Now, again, relationships, we immediately think about romantic relationships, but really, I'm talking about any type of relationship, whether this is relationship with a partner, relationship with a neighbor, relationship with a boss, relationship with a really good friend or a set of friends. This could be, I'm looking at could be relationships with kids. It could be with your parents. When we have a contract, there is something that binds us to that person beyond our physical DNA, that there's something that we're supposed to do or learn from that particular soul. So many times when people come to me for Akashic record readings or soul realignment work, they want to know about the relationships that they have in their lives. In fact, I've got someone tomorrow that gave me all of the birth information of her children and her husband because she really wants to understand what these karmic contracts are. So I'll be talking through that with her tomorrow. But it's this whole idea of we have some responsibility or some kind of lesson we're supposed to learn within the contract, within the binding of that relationship. So for instance, if it is a spouse, a lot of times it's basically to bring kids into the world. Your contract is oftentimes to bring kids into the world. And then after that, well, your contract's done and sometimes the relationship ends, sometimes it stays together, but really the main contract sometimes can be about bringing children into the world. The relationship itself could be part of the contract. Maybe you and that soul have to come together and intermingle and learn how your lives are intertwined in order to figure out the next step of your own evolution. So, for instance, sometimes we have these relationship patterns and we get into these relationships with people, but the contract with a particular person is that as part of that interaction, as part of that interweaving of lives, we have to learn that maybe there are patterns to outgrow, and sometimes that pattern to outgrow is that type of relationship. So, that person in particular who you may have to break up with or divorce or whatever, that that concept of understanding, wow, okay, I am doing the same thing over and over again. And that soul, if you have contracted with that person, if you get to the point where you realize, yeah, I've learned the lesson, I'm not supposed to be in this relationship anymore, that is when the contract is done. You've learned what you're supposed to learn, you're supposed to move on. And so, lots of different ways that this can play out. Other kinds of relationship contracts. What about friendships? What about when you have an ongoing friendship and you maybe this is a non-tumultuous one. So this is an ongoing relationship and it's very pretty easy. And this is something that you and this other person or people, you just flow through life. And so the contract is to support each other. And yet you can also have the contracts with other humans that you start out as really good friends and then something happens and you're realizing, whoa, I cannot be in this relationship. Part of that breakup of that friendship could be you completing, excuse me, some sort of a cycle with that particular soul that needs to end at that time. It could also be that maybe that person really offended you and they can't get it through their heads how they offended you. And so you as that soul has to decide, is this someone I can keep in my life? Is this someone that if they can't own their stuff, if they can't see where they've hurt me, well, then maybe it's time for that contract to end. Again, that goes with, excuse me again, that goes with family members, that could go with friends, that could go with colleagues, that could go with anybody. But it all has to do with your own soul's evolution. So no matter what the soul to soul kind of relationship is, it's all about what you're supposed to learn. It's all about when is it that you feel like you're complete? When is it that you're supposed to end that relationship? And that's usually when the contract ends. Because then you've gleaned everything. Well, you might not have gleaned everything because a lot of times we learn in retrospect. A lot of times it's not until after we get out of those relationships or away from those people that we realize, wow, okay, these were the lessons. This is what I was supposed to learn. But that you've had the experiences directly with that individual that you're supposed to have in order for you to get to the point of completing your contract. So there's that. What about relationship contracts with parents? So I cannot tell you the number of people, including myself, who have felt or who have told me that they felt like they were their parents' parents, that they felt like they had to take care of their parents, that they felt responsible for taking care of their parents. And yet it was disrupting their own lives. And so sometimes we have these contracts to take care of our parents, but it's part of our own learning of, wow, am I doing too much? Wow, am I codependent? Wow, am I don't know, clinging on to something that I shouldn't be clinging on to? But it's this whole idea of how is it that we recognize the contract? How is it that we get to the point where we've learned what we're supposed to learn so that our contract can be complete? It's not that these contracts wait around until we die. We can complete many contracts in a given lifetime if we are learning what we're supposed to learn and realize, wow, okay, I need to either change the dynamic within this relationship because that part of the contract is done, or I need to get away from this person. So it can be one or another thing. What about a partner or a friend or a parent when they die? Is that the end of the contract? Not necessarily. And the reason that I say that is the contract is not complete until a person has learned everything they're supposed to learn and until they have found that peace within themselves, which is what I call soul health. Finding that peace within themselves to be able to go, okay, I'm at peace with this. I understand this. I'm going to let go of this. I'm not holding them responsible anymore. I'm not holding myself responsible anymore. Doesn't mean you forget the interactions you had, but that you're making peace with it within yourself so that your contract is actually complete. Now, what I will say is there are some cases where we carry those contracts into the afterlife for the other person. So for instance, excuse me, a number of people still feel responsible for their parents' feelings, or other people, maybe it was a partner or a spouse feelings, even though they've passed. And so some of it is helping them do the karmic removal and helping them realize what that relationship was all about, so they can detach and so they can make peace with it. So it can go on even after death, even though that human is gone, or that even if it's with an animal, if that animal is gone, sometimes the relationship karmic contract continues afterward until it is dissolved or resolved. Otherwise, you're going to be coming back into a future lifetime to finish it out. And I'm going to talk about that at the end of this video. Um, what about ancestral contracts? Wow, we are having a surge of ancestral healing going on right now. And when I talk about ancestral healing, it's basically working with an individual in current life that basically is dealing with the aftermath or the residue or the residual wounds or traumas of the generations that came before them. And they've carried that with them, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly. And the contract is for that person to break the contract, complete the contract, break the cycle, whatever that is. But I am seeing so many clients, particularly female clients, doing this right now, where they are outgrowing old abuse patterns. They're outgrowing the idea that they have to stay quiet. They're outgrowing this need to kind of tuck themselves in and not be seen. And so we're seeing this real beautiful uprising in the feminine energies, because women aren't going to be held down anymore in that ancestral compression or suppression. And so ancestral healing is big right now. And in this can be a cultural kind of ancestral wound that people are healing. And that might be the contract. It could be, again, a familial line kind of thing. It could be a generational thing. It could be an ethnic thing. It could be a countrywide kind of thing. There's so many different levels of ancestral healing that we could be doing that are part of our karmic contract. And I see it happening, even if people don't know to name it that, but I'm seeing it happening over and over and over again. So there's a lot of that. And then I'm going to bring this down just to some of the basics, and then I'm going to widen the view again. What about financial contracts? Some of us come in with poverty mindsets, and that is again from old lifetimes. That is from when we have had poverty-stricken lifetimes. But we've come into a lifetime now of feeling like, oh, I'm not ever going to have enough, or I'm really scared to not have enough, or I have a mindset that, I'm going to be poor all of my life. I have many, many clients who are dealing with this. So again, part of this is ancestral, but part of this is the individual contract that they are supposed to overcome and outgrow so that they can move forward into prosperity. What about a health contract? What about the idea that, oh gosh, what if someone ends up with a health problem? Now, I would actually say that my father had a health contract. He had an injury contract, because when I was 9 years old, he had an injury. He had a motor vehicle kind of injury that left him with a broken hip, broken arm. We don't know how much of a brain injury. I mean, his personality didn't change a lot, other than I know that he got very depressed. So it's hard to know if he had a TBI or not. Traumatic brain injury. But it's one of those things where I know he had a contract. He had a contract to have that injury, because his injury catalyzed so much change within the family dynamic. And, I can't speak for my siblings. I can't speak for my mom, but I know from what I can assume from their perspectives, they all had different lessons to learn from my dad's accident. As well as probably some of his coworkers and some of his family members. So there was this widespread kind of spiderweb effect that the contract with his injury had on other people. Now, I would say I probably would not be talking about the soul. I would not be talking about soul health. I would not have my soul health model if I didn't at age 9 see his world being broken apart, our worlds being kind of shattered and broken apart. And in retrospect, I look at it and think, wow, he had an injury contract. He had a contract to co-create the circumstances, co-create the situations that basically would make it possible for everybody in the family and everybody that kind of was on the outer spokes of that spider web to have experiences that would change them. And, I look at that contract and I was so upset with that thing for so long. I was so hurt. There was so much to his injury that was so both catastrophic and catalytic for me. Because when I look at how much I changed, I pretty much feel like my childhood ended at age 9 because of that. But I also become very observant. At that point, I was very observant of the dynamics in the family. I was very observant of his dynamics. I was very observant of the medical system. I was just observant at that time. I don't remember being that observant until that happened. So it was a catalyst. So we have to think about these contracts. Sometimes they're catastrophic, but they are always catalysts. They're always something that is there for us to expand our awareness and growth. And that particular one, his injury contract, really made a difference in all of our lives. Now, think about this. If you have someone in your life or you have a health problem, how is that possibly a contract either with yourself to learn something that you're supposed to learn about yourself, which I do believe that that was about my dad as well. I think he had lessons to learn from having that injury. And I think the universe wanted to kind of nail him down and put him in a place where he had to do some self-reflection. Now, whether or not he did all of it, I don't know. I do know he was a reflective person, though. But think about this. If you have a health situation, is it a catalyst for something? Is it something that is there to make you learn something? I cannot tell you the number of people who have said that their illnesses are basically what caused their spiritual awakenings, whether it was an injury like my dad, whether it was some very serious health condition, whatever it might be. I have so many people who have said that it is that health kind of condition that woke them up. It could be a family member who has the health condition. Again, their contract was in place to create the circumstances for you to learn and grow in whatever way that you're learning and growing from it. But it's opening up the idea of, wow, okay, I had my own spiritual awareness when he or she was having, their health concerns, or when they died suddenly. So it could be a number of things that come with health kinds of contracts. What about a career contract? For me, like I said, for whatever reason, I knew at age 14, 15 that I was supposed to be a psychologist. My contract became activated. It was the time where I knew that this was what I was supposed to do. So I got hyper focused. I just did everything I was supposed to do that was going to get me to that licensure process. And then from there on, my world expanded even more because of the spiritual world. So we can have these karmic contracts with careers, or even just a job that we're supposed to go to, and then, whoo, we hate the job. Speaking of which, I very much believe I had a contract with the medical school that brought me here to North Carolina. I really feel like that was supposed to get me here, but I wasn't supposed to stay in the job. It was short-lived. After a year, I hated the job. I was not happy in that job for so many reasons. And yet it wasn't until I left the job that I realized, and that was about, I kept in there thinking it was me, thinking I just needed to figure out how to fit in or do something differently. It wasn't that I was not doing a good job. I was told all the time what a good job I was doing. But it was one of those things where I was not happy. It was not aligned with me. And so once I left that job, opened my private practice was full within 5 weeks. I never turned back. It was apparently that job that brought me here to North Carolina was a contract. When I went into private practice, that was apparently a contract that I had not expected. I always thought I would be teaching in a university, but my contract led me down the path to actually open up the space so I could be doing what I'm doing now. So, in other words, even with your education, even with your contracts that you have with careers or jobs, you may think you're going in a direction because it's what you're supposed to do. But if something starts stirring within you that leads you down a different path, it might be that each step along the way was part of a mini contract to get you to where you're supposed to be for your bigger contract in life. So think about that, is that sometimes we have these like mini contracts that lead us up into the big one, or lead us up into just continuing to what seemingly we are doing to meander through life. But really, it's a matter of picking up education or information along the way, or experiences along the way, that are going to get us closer and closer to that personal life contract that we have. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about life purpose before I go into a world impact kind of contract. Everybody I know wants to know what their life purpose is because they think it's going to make their lives easier to know that. Now, it could and it could not. But part of our contract from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime is to have the experiences, listen to our truths, going in the directions that we're supposed to go to more closely align with who we are. And it generally is not until we are at the end of our track of our lifetimes, and I'm going to say that again, not until we're kind of toward the end of our track of lifetimes. So in other words, if you're a younger soul or even like a middle adult soul, you're probably not going to be living out your soul contract. You might be living out life purposes and life contracts that will get you closer and closer, but it's not until you're almost done reincarnating that you get to the point where you were in your soul purpose. So that's a whole different topic that I'm going to explore in another video, but it's this whole idea of people so want to know what their life purpose is. Okay, you are living lots of life purposes that are getting you to your soul purpose. Then when someone says, I want to know what my soul purpose is, again, they're wanting to get closer and closer, but you can't skip the grades. You can't skip the contracts. You can't skip the levels. You have to get to that point where you're understanding who you are at that point, where you don't have to ask outside of yourself what your purpose is. You have this sense of knowing. And I think that's what happened for me when I was, basically 14, 15 years old, is that I somehow became aware of my life purpose and my soul purpose. I didn't know what my soul purpose was until now. I didn't realize that, my whole soul purpose is to teach you about the soul and help make it tangible and help make it learnable for people. So that's a big part of this, is our life purpose is so tied to each and every one of those little contracts. And our soul purpose is basically the accumulation of all of those contracts that we have in a life or lifetimes that adds up into us understanding what our soul purpose is. Now, from a world impact contract perspective, now, what does this mean? So think about it. I've got a few people written down here. So we have people like the peacemakers. We have the people like Gandhi. We have the people like Christ. We have the people like Mother Teresa. We have the people like the popes, even though people would argue that there's been some scandal with some of the popes. But for the most part, they're all supposed to be peacemakers. They're supposed to be global icons of love and peace and bringing people together. Again, we could argue that that doesn't always happen. But it's this whole idea of we have the world contracts of peacemakers. So think about all the people that might be global iconic ideas of peacemakers. And then we have the innovators. These, again, are contracted to have an impact on the world. So people like Einstein, a scientist, he was kind of quirky. He had beautiful things to say, and he had deep things to say, even though he looked a little kind of different. He looked a little eccentric, basically. What about philosophers in general? We have all of the philosophers that we think about all the way back to, thousands of years ago, Socrates, Plato, Hippocrates, all of the early philosophers and medical folks that were as part of the field of medicine. All of them were basically contracted to create a different world from a philosophical perspective. Another innovator, what about Henry Ford? We think about Henry Ford as a car maker. He was a car maker, but think about how he revolutionized how cars were built. Think about how he revolutionized a lot about how he made cars affordable for people. So it wasn't just for the elitist. He started really through a lot of his own failures. He started realizing, wait, I need to make the impact for more people. And that is where his energies went. So think about this. We've got the peacemakers that affect millions and billions of people. We have the innovators that affect millions and billions of people. All of them have had karmic contracts to do that as part of their life purpose and soul purpose. And then we have the disruptors. We have the people who have these karmic contracts to come into our human lives and be disruptors. Now, that can be on a very small level. That can basically be soul-to-soul kinds of relationships. That could be family relationships. That could be partner relationships. But on a global perspective, if we think about karmic contracts that are basically meant to disrupt, we think about our current system. We have many, many people in the world right now that are, you know, that are disrupting the world. They're disrupting peace. They're doing everything to act against basically the peacemakers. But if you think back to people like Hitler, we can think back to all of the heinous acts that these people did, and they were disruptors. And yet, in the long run, we experienced that so that we could have a different sense of compassion and peace for other people. So, our current president in the United States is seen as a global disruptor, and he loves disrupting. He doesn't really like peace. He loves disrupting. But we have to think about it is that he has a karmic contract to disrupt so that other people can grow and learn and evolve. And so it's this whole idea of we have to have the disruptors just as much as we have the peacekeepers and the innovators, because it keeps that growth going. It keeps catalyzing. And so, like I said, we can have a relationship that's catastrophic and catalytic at the same time. But we have to look at these contracts that some of these leaders have, well, all of these leaders have, and basically it's to make an impact on the global world. And sometimes it comes through peace, sometimes it comes through innovation, and sometimes it comes through disruption. So this is just a smidge of all of the different kinds of contracts a person can have, but this is something to start thinking about and expanding your view. This is, again, I talk about bringing ancient wisdom to the modern soul. This is how we can widen the view on what we experience in our human condition to understand it better, but then also to understand it from the soul side. You are a soul living a human experience, not the other way around. And it's that whole idea to, again, anchor yourself back into that experience and go, oh, wow, what am I supposed to gain? What am I supposed to learn? What am I supposed to feel catalyzed by so that I can keep moving forward into this path of evolution? This is what karmic contracts are all about. Again, many, many different kinds of karmic contracts. As part of my Soul Healing Institute, I'm going to be putting out videos about these, trainings about these, so that people can understand them more and more. But I wanted to give you a basic splash, maybe, of information about how this might be happening in your own life, how this is, I shouldn't say might be, is happening in your life, how you might be in a contract or one or more contracts of your own, and how to understand it from kind of a bigger perspective so you can understand how and what you're supposed to be learning at this moment. The human condition is fodder for growth. It is basically the playground. They call it, in spiritual folks call it earth school, that we basically, our souls come here to learn in a certain way, and it is all there for us to expand. But when it comes to understanding karmic contracts, it's really important to step back and go, wow, what kind of contracts am I participating in? What kind of contracts have I had? And what am I watching around me that's affecting me that is a catalyst for me in one or more ways? Because these contracts are always about learning. They are always about our evolution. It's always about how it is we can re-perceive what's going on and take us to that next level. So again, ancient wisdom for the modern soul. Would love to hear your comments. Again, there will be more trainings coming. There will be actual trainings coming along. This is just a splash of information I want to give you so you can kind of wet your whistle a little bit and understand your own life a little bit more. Have a wonderful day, and I will be back soon with more information.